My name is Sandy Adomaitis, the social media director for the Page International Screenwriting Awards, and your host for the Writers Hangout, a podcast that celebrates the many stages of writing, from inspiration to the first draft, revising, getting a project made, and everything in between. We'll talk to the best and the brightest in the entertainment industry and create a space where you can hang out, learn from the pros, and have fun. Hey, writers and friends, it's Sandy. We have a fantastic show for you today. My guest is legendary entertainment lawyer Peter Dekom. He has rep clients including George Lucas, Keenen Ivory Wayans, John Travolta, Ron Howard, and Robert Towne, as well as renowned companies like Sears and JVC. As an advisor, Peter has made substantial contributions to New Mexico, helping to shape the state's film incentives. His efforts have not gone unnoticed. He has been honored on Forbes' list of the top 100 U.S. lawyers and recognized by Premiere Magazine as one of the 50 most powerful people in Hollywood. Furthermore, he has received the title of, get this, Entertainment Lawyer of the Year from both the Beverly Hills and Century City Bar Association. Writers, this is a big deal. Trust me, you are going to want to bookmark this episode and listen to it at least 4 times. Peter shares a treasure trove of great advice. Let's start the show. Peter Dekom, thank you so much for joining us on the Writers Hangout.
Well, either that or you're going to publish those nasty pictures of me, so I had to do it.
They are in a vault, and as I promised, at the end of this episode, I will give you the address.
Sounds like Mission Impossible, but okay.
Peter, you are on the show on a very special day. It's raining in LA. How do you feel about that?
A little precipitous. I think it's a field day for people who do cloud computing, though.
You have the most eclectic, interesting background. I know writers who were lawyers first, such as Jonathan Lisco, who's now running Yellow Jacket, and Steve Mazur, who wrote Liar, Liar. They were lawyers first, and then they became writers. You went from filmmaker to legendary lawyer. Can you talk about that journey?
Well, it's all accidental. First of all, I went to law school because there was a lull in hiring in the motion picture and television industry. I had been a television news writer, if that's not still an oxymoron, for a local TV station. And I realized that doing that and writing bios for a concert master for Los Angeles Philharmonic were not consistent with having gone to film school, and I needed to fill my time. And back then, everybody who didn't know what the hell they were doing went to law school, so I got in line.
Did you feel you learned a lot in law school, that it was worth the price of admission?
I will say that in my entire education, starting with kindergarten, going all the way through graduate school, undergraduate, etc., law school was the easiest part of my education in my entire life. It was so easy compared to undergraduate and kindergarten, which were a bitch. Law school was just easy. If someone's moderately intelligent or profoundly intelligent, if they follow my technique when they go to law school, I guarantee they graduate in the top 10% of their class. And they have to follow it diligently. I graduated first, inadvertently, because I thought that UCLA did not grade, but apparently they did grade pass-fail, except they did grade the top 10, and inadvertently I graduated first in my class, originally from terror, and then from following a very severe study pattern that probably works for anything other than mathematical and physics courses, but it does work.
Bravo for the top of your class. Have you packaged this?
It's very easy. I'd rather just talk it out. The idea is about 2 things: repetition and motor memory. And repetition includes something called consolidation and summary. So as you move through any academic course that has, traditional linear text information, what you do, number one, underlining is penalty by instantaneous death. Someone will come up and shoot you in the head because underlining creates absolutely no motor memory whatsoever. You have to write in the margins of your book, in whether you use a little symbolic system that you develop for yourself. But the object is to get your hand moving so that it creates a first stage motor memory. In class, you do not use your computer at all. You basically handwrite because, again, you're trying to create motor memory. After class, whatever the class is, you consolidate the notes you have in your book plus the notes you have from class, and that you start using a little keyboard on. And that you do a complete outline. It's completely organized. In the process of consolidating and extracting the essence of whatever you're doing, your mind is tackling with what's important and what's not and how to express it. First stage of actually writing something that is going into your computer. 2 or 3 weeks before the class ends, you do a summary on 2 single-spaced pages and you memorize everything on it. You never look back at the prior document. You don't look back at the book once you do your consolidated class and book notes. And once you do your outline, you never look back at anything else. The idea here is by the time your brain has processed the consolidation and repetition, and you've used motor memory through typing skills, consolidation skills, you are now understand your material. And then you focus on the 2 most important things during an exam: sleep and eating. What you're doing is you're learning to understand how to organize and put the material and express what the material is. If it's case names, fine. If it's some other form of information, you have to categorize it and you have to summarize it. And then you have to write something, a mnemonic in your little summary that when you ultimately are tested on it, the professor knows you know what you're talking about. You know, like the constitutionality, first constitutionality test, Marbury versus Madison or whatever. You put a mnemonic in it. And if they're major judges, if you're a law student, you put in major opinions, dissents, and concurrences. And you do that, you can't help but get a great grade. There's nothing they can do when you're throwing out this information. There's nothing they can do to give you a low grade unless you really misunderstood the material. Then you shouldn't be in that form of academia. In the 3 years of law school, I missed 3 classes. Each of those misses of classes were for the benefit of the law school. They wanted me to do something somewhere else.
Peter, that is amazing.
Well, this is true whatever you're doing. I write a blog. And I've written a blog now, about 5,000 blogs since 2008. There is a discipline to writing. It is not a free form of just write whatever you want. There's structure to it. And in the screenplays and the teleplays, there's always structure to it. And if you don't have the characters and the settings all completely in your mind thoroughly, you know what the characters ate for breakfast, you know what scares them, you can't write. It's knowing your milieu. And ultimately, once you know your characters and you set your themes and your goals and you've got your main scenes, don't worry about it. The characters are going to write themselves. You're a voyeur to an improv acting session and you're taking notes because the characters take off because you fleshed them out. You put their greatest fears and greatest desires. You know who they are. You give them a goal. They're going to tell you how to get there. I can't give a name here. One of the most famous writers in the history of the motion picture business. This writer was also a director. He was very secure as a writer, but totally insecure as a director. And he basically took a finished film and ran away with it and edited it in a place where the studio could never find him. He finished it off, but he managed to piss off the head of the studio, the major producer who was attached to it. And then the movie came in and did, okay. Years later, he was feeling insecure and it's time for him to change agents and lawyers. And he came to me. He sat down in front of me. I mean, this is one of the 10 top writers in the history of the business. And basically, what I ferreted out from him is that he'd alienated everybody he'd ever worked for and every agent had ever represented him. I said, so let me ask you a bizarre question, person of fame. If you were going to write a scene in which your writer, director, whatever, were going to convince somebody at a studio high up that you've got a meeting with, why they should pick up your project and make it, how would you write that scene? And how would writing that scene be different from what you actually did? And there was a pause, probably the longest pause in any conversation I ever had with a client. At the end of what seemed like an eternity, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, maybe longer, I just sat there. I did not interrupt him because this isn't a question he had to answer for himself. And at the end of that time period, he said, oh. At that moment, I said, if I set you up with the head of the studio that you pissed off, do you think you can A, apologize, and B, convince them to work with you again, following that technique? He said, yes. So I called up the chairman of a major studio, not the president, the chairman. And I said, such and such a person whom you had trouble with would like to come in and apologize to you in person. Will you take that meeting? I knew the head of the studio, so it wasn't particularly, I knew what the answer was going to be. He was a decent man. And he said, yes. I sent my client into that meeting. At the end of that meeting, there was a green light screenplay, and it became a movie almost immediately, and it was a hit. All I can tell you is you use your skills as a writer, not just to write something for others to perform. You have to write your own script. You have to understand the milieu. And I can sit here and give you all these legal hints. You've seen them, Sandy. I've given you a list here. But I also understand that ultimately, the thing that writers are often very, very much loners, and they're shy about selling themselves. None of the writers you mentioned who were lawyers are going to suffer from that. But fundamentally, everything you do in life at one level or another is salesmanship and marketing. How the hell do you get somebody interested in your product? And what are their motivations, their fears and desires, and how do they work? So I'm going to ask your writers a question. I'm going to put a pause on this recording just by leaving blank time. What is the primary motivation of a senior executive at a motion picture studio or television network who has the right to green light product? What is their number one motivation? Pause. Long enough pause. Okay, Sandy, answer the question.
Money.
Wrong, you get an F.
Oh,
no. I taught a course at Berkeley to MBA candidates, and they gave the same answer that you did. Fortunately, it should be the right answer if you're in a corporate where your job is to generate revenue. Back in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and some almost into the 70s, people who ran companies were the studio heads. Today, the studio is a division of a conglomerate. So everybody who runs a studio, motion picture or television network, et cetera, reports to somebody else. So the number one motivation in the green light position is abject terror, fear. And until you understand that fear and how pervasive it is, when I represented Peter Chernin when he was making his deal at Fox and he became chief operating officer, I said, as fast as you can, get out of that job, move up into a higher level of job where you can fire the person who takes your job. Because you don't want to be the picture picker, because you're the first person to get fired, because sooner or later you're going to screw it up. But that tells you the motivation that if you tell your higher ups, the reason I picked up this project is I love the story, I love the writing, I love the characters, you're going to die. Because if that movie is produced and it doesn't knock it out of the ballpark, the only thing your bosses have learned about you is you have no taste, or your taste is not commercial. Therefore, they should get rid of you. So generally speaking, when you are in the decision-making position, you are looking for third-party confirmation that your decision as a decider, a green lighter, or whatever you want to call it, is justified in light of additional variables other than your own taste. Such as, I got an amazing showrunner who's going to do this stuff. I got a superstar actor. In the motion picture area, it's generally who's the director, who is starring in it, where is it done, why am I making it? Is it based on something that's already in existence? A best-selling novel. Best-selling novels get into bidding wars. Why? Because they've already been tested by an audience. So you can CYA, cover your posterior, in a way that you can explain it to your bosses. So what you're really beginning to realize that as a writer with a finished screenplay that you know is the best damn thing on the planet, although every writer I've ever talked to believes that about their work. So it's not much of a sales point when you tell somebody, I know this is another whatever name of movie. This is another Barbie. This is another Star Wars. This is another. It doesn't help. Everybody says that, and it's stupid. But what you really got to do is say, okay, what do I do to my script to make it worth someone picking up? The answer is it takes a village. We hear that expression all the time, but it's something every writer and filmmaker should put over their door, unless you're at the level of a superstar, a certain guy named Nolan who will remain nameless otherwise, or someone spiel something or other. You don't have the clout to cause something to be made. So what
Okay.
your job is, if you go to a studio executive, even willing to talk to you about your wonderful, unbelievably incredible script, what they typically will do if they like it is they come back when you got a movie star and a director. That's
Okay.
stupid. You should have known that day one. And if you take it too early and they've heard it and you come back later, they're going to be bored by it. So
Right.
don't even try to set it up at a studio or a network until you've got the village.
Peter,
Huh?
I'm going to throw out, can we do an improv? Do a 3 scenario improv? I'm going to be a character and you're a studio head or just you. Advise me. My name's Ruby. I'm 32 years old and I live in South Carolina.
So
And
you're over the hill and isolated. Okay, keep going.
oh, yeah, I know that. It's pretty tough. I'm writing a horror screenplay and I caught the attention of an assistant at Blumhouse Film on Twitter. He asked me to send him my script. I'm not finished, but should I go ahead and send him my first 10 pages? I'm
No.
afraid I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose this once in a lifetime opportunity if I don't send him something.
Send him a log line and say, I'm going to be finished with the whole thing within X. And when it's done, happy to show it to you. But send him something, send him a log line and saying, this is the genre is such and such. Here are my characters. Here's the place I'm putting them. And here's the part that scares you. By the way, for some reason, I don't like horror films, but I have represented so many people in that space. It's terrifying. And from famous filmmakers to writers, actually one of the filmmakers who wrote film Fright Nights and Child's Play went to law school with me.
There you go.
And he gave me a script, and I think I was in my second year, and I looked at it, and he was an actor who finally decided he had to get a real job, so he's going to law school. And I looked at him and said, this script is extraordinary. Why are you in law school? You're wasting your time. And unfortunately, he took me seriously and became a major film writer. He chose horror as his métier, but he wrote some pretty famous stuff. And then he directed the stuff. And I will just say that horror is probably an easier thing to set up because it doesn't require stars or a lot of extrinsic vetting. It's one of the few genres where you can go in at a lower level. Also, most horror films, which are not heavily science fiction based, are cheaper to produce.
Yes.
That's why, Blumhouse makes so much money. They produce almost nothing over $5 million in the feature area. So ultimately, what you're doing here is you're making something that works. I represented everybody from this guy, Tom Holland, Gary Sherman, who produced, iconic movie. I represent an author named Clive Barker, who's a #2 horror author in the world.
Get out of town.
So I know all these people, and they're different. They're all nuts in a good way, and I love all of them. Gary Sherman's actually became one of my closest friends. Now he's doing a reality programming. He's doing a reality thing at the Grand Rapids Police Department because he lives in the Midwest.
That's fascinating. What is the reality show Grand Rapids? Say that again.
It's the Grand Rapids Police Department. One of his best friends is chief of police. And one of the interesting things about docuseries, this guy's done features and TV series, all kinds of stuff. What he understands well about reality television docuseries, it's about storytelling.
Yes.
So when he gathers his minions about and he puts it and structures it, he makes it compelling because it's storytelling. And ultimately, that's what we're doing. We're all gathered around a campfire and someone's telling us a wonderful story. But again, it takes a village. He can get somebody to pay attention to him because of what he's done with his life.
Got it.
Ultimately, horror is the easy button, except there's only one catch with horror. There's too much of it. So when you step into that world, that's when the rare circumstance where you can scare the living crap out of the person reading it, where they have to urinate more often than not during the reading of the script, you're basically in a situation where you got them.
Great.
And if you can scare them, the idea here is it doesn't take a superstar director. There is a group of acceptable directors, but actors. This is not an actor-driven medium. Horror is a scare the crap out of you medium.
It's a good genre. Okay, my name is Tommy. I'm 43 and I live in Connecticut and I'm married. I have 3 kids and I love my day job. I wrote a thriller screenplay. I believe it's the next Manchurian Candidate. Do I have a chance? Do I
No,
have to go to LA, network, and live there to sell my script?
no. In fact, LA may be one of the things I'm discovering as we've gone through a pandemic, a strike, and a depression, is that LA is not the place. The answer here is go back to the terms, it takes a village. Who is the village who would most likely cause your motion picture to get somebody to want to take a risk? What is it that you can add from the village that takes away that fear that the green lighting determinant, the executive is going to make the pickup decision, makes them comfortable because third parties with credibility have put their imprimatur on your property? Start with a village. Who are the most appropriate people? And then if you have an agent, although I have to say there are a few agents who do an extraordinary job, but 90% of the agents rely on mailing out the scripts with putting their name on it because they're famous agents, therefore it must be a decent script, but they don't really sell it. Only people who have risen to the top or whose writing is so extraordinary that the agent will go out of their way to sell it. In California, lawyers cannot function as agents. The labor commissioner does not like us. Apparently, we didn't bribe them enough. We should have used. Obviously, there's something that made we didn't have the requisite photographs. Whatever it was, we are banned from performing job as an agent, except when it comes to submitting musical material to recording companies.
I thought that was across the United States. I didn't know it was just California.
California and New York have the most restrictive rules. New York not as restrictive as California. California will put you in movie jail. I mean, basically, if you're paid as a lawyer and you function as an agent, to the extent you function as an agent and there wasn't a real agent involved, you can be forced to disgorge your fee.
Ah, okay.
And if you think this is a hobby, you should try. I remember when I was in the law firm that bore my name, I had two secretaries during the day, one at night, and I typed most of what I did anyway. And I fielded an average of 200 phone calls during the phone era and 150 to 200 texts and emails when we shifted into that medium.
Peter, I came up knowing your name, and your name would strike terror. Nobody wanted to take your phone call of the higher ups where I was coming up.
I'll give you a story you'll enjoy. I'm not a yeller or a screamer. My partner, Jake Bloom, was. I can say no as gently as anyone, and I am as firm as the greatest yeller or screamer in the world. So ultimately, one of my clients had come to me and we're trying to figure out where to go. This is a very hot client. Where do we go? Where are the studios? And I said, look, the last place you want to go among the majors is Disney because they're cheap. So we'll put them at the bottom of the list. And so a senior executive at Disney found out that I had said that. And that executive called me up and started to berate me. And he was president of one of their labels. And I let him go and I said, I don't know if I can use the vernacular here, but who the F do you think you are? You're nobody to us. We don't care about you. We know that what your job is to put hors d'oeuvres on a tray and take them to the head of the studio and let him pick what he wants to eat or she wants to eat. But you need me, and I sure as hell don't need you because I got all the other studios out there and they're knocking down the door to get our clients. Oh, and by the way, so is your company. And I said, so go and I hung up on it. Now I knew at this moment he was probably urinating in his pants. And I knew because we were basically one of the three law firms in the industry. We dominated it. And I actually started laughing because I looked at my watch and I said, I wonder how long it's going to take him to call back and grovel. It took 2 hours. Call back and said, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. Because I was I was picturing him going to the head of the company and saying, I just pissed off one of the three biggest law firms in the United States in this space with all the clients we want. And I think I burned a bridge. And his boss could either fire him or make him feel like the small person he was. So eventually he called back and he got back. I was never really angry. I basically revert to method. Anybody who can get control of a person's emotions, well, you control them. So if I can make somebody angry at me or love me or whatever it is, the minute you let your emotions get in the way of deal making, you're useless. And when lawyers say, "Why don't you go yell at the guy? Why don't you?" You know what? The canons of ethics for lawyers tell lawyers you cannot let your client determine the strategy. Your client can determine the goals, but once they hire you, you get to determine how you do it. And I have never met a client who knew better than I did. I mean, I had a client who made about, he owned a little company and had quite a nice little TV library. And he would tell me every now and again, "I have more experience in making deals than you do." And I said, "What, are you up to 1% of my volume or what?" At the end of the day, there are people who develop a reputation of being competent deal makers. But one of the other things among competent deal makers, not just to respect, because remember, you don't start off with respect in this business. You build it by having knowledge, and you have an ability to understand the other person, and you understand what you can make and what you can't do. So you really got to have, as a lawyer, I find people who graduate from law school and want to be deal makers are worthless. I spent years honing my craft, learning about bankruptcy in the entertainment space, copyright law, securities when you will go out raising money, labor law when you're basically having to deal with, the Writers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, the IATSC, all these people. I had taken major courses or had direct learning experience in every one of these categories before I started becoming the deal maker that I became famous to be. And it's because I understood all of it, not part of it. Even to this day, I still draft most of the complicated transactions that I do. And it doesn't go to anybody else. I have an of counsel I work with. Once in a while, I'll give her something to do because I trained her. I know she's good, but ultimately, I like doing a lot of the stuff hands-on myself. And I've been doing that. I also look at it. You have to understand what your client can understand and what they can't understand. But I always tell clients, only you can breach a contract or perform a contract. I can't. So at some juncture, you're going to have to read it. And if you don't understand it, you have to ask me to explain what you don't understand. And if a lawyer tells you, well, that's just the way they do it, fire them. Why is it they do it that way? What made it that way? And what is your concern and what can be done about it? Treat your client with respect.
Okay.
And I have a whole bunch of that little litany of things that I sent you on a little piece of paper that is sitting in front of me. At some juncture, I'm not sure whether your audience would like to have some absolutely free legal advice, but
absolutely.
I think the most important thing that I said today is for most screenwriters, submitting it to the people who greenlight and pick up product, unless you are a name and recognized as such, is a waste of your time. You should be figuring out how to gather a village. And remember, just because you think someone's important doesn't mean they are. There are people who were superstars 5 or 6 years ago who faded from glory. So make sure that when you're creating your village or you're making your contact or using a friend to get to a friend to get to X, that ultimately you are aware of where they sit in the industry today. A lot of people in small towns, like in parts of Connecticut, where I spent 4 lovely years, South Carolina, which I've only been to once to visit a client on a set, basically they don't understand. I think a TV star from 5 or 6 years ago has name recognition to them, may have no vetting or CYA potential to the green lighting executive that you're talking to. So let me go through a couple of things. I've gone through some of them already because I love talking to writers who understand how to write and not always how to market. Ultimately, selling and marketing your content is just as important as creating it. Because if you can't sell it, what good is what have you done other than satisfied your ego in creating something that you love? I mean, I write as a hobby. I've written 13 scripts just for the hell of it. One of them was produced for a movie. I hated it so much I took my pseudonym off of it, which is the ultimate height of arrogance, but I am. In any event, let's go through a couple of things about writers. Number one, a lot of people, when they write something, will run to the Writers Guild and register it. That is a complete and utter, total, unmitigated waste of time. Don't do it. The Supreme Court, just a very short while ago, long after the WGA Writers Registration Service had been around, basically said you don't have an actionable and protectable copyright until you register it with the Library of Congress. So my advice 100% of the time is create legal protection for your property. Go online. It's called an small e, CO caps, which is basically an electronic filing of a copyright, ECO, and register your script. Open up an account with a copyright office. So if you do revisions, you can register them too. But before you send it out into the public or where third parties can steal it readily, register it. Number 2, ideas are not subject to copyright. Titles are not subject to copyright. There are perverse ways to protect a title, but generally speaking, you should assume that your title is not protected. So if you think you have a really special title, don't use it until you're ready. Also understand that within the mainstream television networks, streamers, and studios, a lot of them are members of the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America, and they have a title registration service. And among that group, by contract, they protect each other's titles. So if you happen to venture into that world, you're not going to get your titles. Always have something back behind it. But hopefully you've got enough of a clever title to be a hook. I'm not going to tell you how to write the thing because that's what you guys are supposed to do.
Do you know what I'm coming across lately? Titles like The Exodus. If it was a gigantic movie,
Leon Uris wrote the book.
Yeah, don't your script a big hit movie from the 60s.
If you're ripping off a big movie from the 60s, understand the life of copyright is long enough to put you in movie jail. And you could either be up for statutory damages, which are $50K, or an injunction or whatever. Don't beg for someone to sue your sorry butt.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky enough to set it up, because you're going to sign, if you option or sell your property, you're going to indemnify the buyer against claims from third parties. And that includes lawsuits. You're going to say your work is original. And if you're not, and you get sued, you're SOL, a legal term, I might add. Also, that when you are writing with somebody else, understand copyrights are uniquely require a writing, just like real estate. If it ain't in writing, it's going to not necessarily be enforceable. It certainly is hard to prove. So when you have 2 people writing a script, it is very important to create a written, detailed collaboration agreement.
What if I say, hey, I'm, it's just me and my buddy. We're really close. I mean, he's my brother. He would never.
So that way, married couples never get divorced.
Yeah.
Once you're married, it's loving forever. It always stays together forever. I don't know how to say this, but that ain't my experience in life. Even the best and closest people. Here's the good news. If you do a collaboration agreement and you never need to use it, so what? You're great. You lucked out.
There you go.
Okay. But if you are in a situation where you don't agree, or you want to sell it here and they want to sell it there, or they want to hire one of you as a director and not the other one or as a producer, or they want a rewrite and the other party isn't available, or you don't agree with the direction they want to go in, you have a creative disagreement, or, what do? Is there a designation of someone who makes the decisions, submissions, who makes the deals, who approves the deals? And what happens if one party thinks it's a really good deal and the other party says, no, I want to sell it to my buddy Frank? At some point, all these issues have to be determined and have to be worked out. I'll give you an example. You have 2 writers. They write a script, and one of them goes on and writes a bunch of other stuff and becomes super famous. And everybody's ready to pay the super famous writer, but not the other writer. And you're tempted to say, wait a minute, I'm selling this. I deserve more, but you don't have an agreement. Everything is going to be assumed to be a joint partnership. The law implies partnerships all the time. If you don't have all this stuff worked out, you can say, okay, you get to sell it. If you don't sell it for a while, I get to sell it for a while. You have to determine how it's going to be marketed, who controls it, and how you get it out there. When does someone decide that it's ready?
Right. Well,
there are lots of issues in it. This is not in writing. This can kill the value of your property.
Yeah, you're going to lose a friendship. You're going to lose a writing partner. You're going to lose your project, maybe. So put it in writing.
Yeah, let's talk about lawyers.
Yes, let's talk about lawyers.
Your family lawyer, who yearns to be an entertainment lawyer, but has no hands-on experience other than a few courses in law school,
right,
ain't a good person to go to. For example, I have a heart problem. Do you go to a dentist? Where do you go? And when you pick a cardiologist, how do you vet the cardiologist skill set? I have another thing that's fascinating to me. My hourly rate is $1,200 an hour, and I think it's dirt cheap at what I do. But what's fascinating is people will go out and they'll say, well, I can get a lawyer to do this for $400. Great. And they will probably cost 10 times more than I cost because I don't have to research stuff. I know what the precedents are. I've been in this business longer than most of them have been alive. So at the end of all of this stuff, you get the cheap lawyer or I can be the good lawyer. Pick one. They're very seldom one and the same. Now, sometimes there's exceptional brilliance at a young age, and I've mentored so many lawyers, and some of them are just absolutely extraordinary. And I love them. Some of them I've mentored into becoming senior executives at places. One friend of mine was at a very major law firm making close to 7 figures a year and was offered, and this is years and years ago, when $1 million is a real amount of money in them lower days. And basically was offered half that amount, but a very, very nice stock package at Pixar. And I looked at Pixar and I said, someone's going to buy it. It's going to be Disney. They have to. No question about it. They have to buy it because Pixar can only take its monetary economic value so far. But since they don't control distribution, by definition, they're going to have to sell to somebody with distribution capacity. So I said, take the deal. My friend is not a client, just a friend. She is a multi-millionaire, owns a home on the water in the Bay Area, hasn't had to work a day in her life since, flies to Italy on a whim, and has more money than anyone could possibly imagine.
Peter, I wish you were there for me coming up in the business.
Well, I can be there for when you come back down. Okay.
Yay! That is just an amazing story. I have one more scenario for you. Can I throw it out to you?
Throw it out. Maybe I will too.
Okay. I'm a 17-year-old influencer. My sexuality is fluid, and I have 800,000 followers on Instagram. I live in Alaska, and I hear that Netflix is interested in doing business with influencers. What do I do with that information?
Okay, let's deal with something called 50 Shades of Chartreuse. That probably wasn't the name, but that was a published novel, online publication that reached 100 million sales. If I had come to a senior executive at a studio, even with a name actor in it, and I handed that script, there isn't a studio in the industry that would have picked up that screenplay, except maybe a porn site. And they wouldn't have touched it. But once you got 100 million people buying the self-published book, all of a sudden, everybody and their dog, and particularly their dogs, bloodhounds in particular, were interested. That's a very interesting lead into you've got a script that you can't sell. But what would happen if you wrote a novel based upon that script, published it, and it worked? Now, all of a sudden, that CYA variable, that ingredient, suddenly fills the screen because now you have the vetting of a published novel and you can see how many people bought the book or read the book. By definition, you have marketed something that resonates with a sufficiently large audience that somebody has to be an idiot to turn down the script.
Got it.
He said, The Village at that point is your script and the book. And if you can get a publisher and you're not sure it's going to be hit material, the time to try to find someone to option or deal with it is to go in while you have it in publisher's galleys, but it hasn't been released yet. And you hype it with a good PR firm and everybody and their dog wants it. And that you haven't had to subject yourself to the horror of submitting it to the public for their happy perusal. Woof, woof. And I do recommend that if you can create pre-existing material and you're gambling, you're hoping that somebody likes it, but marketing and writing are very, very, they seem to be antagonistic handmaidens, but they are in fact complements of different sides of the brain. having a great property and not knowing how to get it made or sold, you're screwed. Even when you sit down to write it, what's my target demographic? It's not a question a lot of people ask because they just feel, oh my God, I got a story in me, I got to tell it. And sometimes, fortuitously and serendipitously, your instincts and the trends in content are congruous. You luck it out. You happen to have hit a cultural nerve, and people want that product. But that's serendipity. I don't believe in serendipity except as a spelling contest entry. But other than that, part of it is just use the part of the brain that isn't necessarily the storyteller, and who would be interested that you know in what you're creating. What is it?
Yes. I hear from writers all the time that the marketing aspect just really confounds, confuses, and upsets. They don't.
Well, then they shouldn't be writers. It's like saying, I want to be a professional truck driver, but I'm allergic to trucks.
Oh, that really hit in the solar plex.
If you're
right.
writing for yourself, fine. And you have no commercial expectations, fine. Nothing wrong with that. I've written a lot of stuff that's never been published. I've written hundreds of professional articles. That's because I love to write. My family is a family of writers and public speakers. We're shameless. My secret fantasy, I hate to share it with you, is to be asked to do, let's say, the half show at the Super Bowl just canceled. We want you to go up there and to fill half an hour on a subject that you know nothing about. That's my fantasy.
I have such faith that you would pull that off, that you would get a standing ovation at the end.
When I've taught courses at UCLA and Berkeley and other places, my goal when I have my students there is to entertain them. Students in school, for the most part, are tired no matter how much sleep they got. And the place where they evidence that tiredness the most, with a few exceptional, brilliant souls, is the classroom. And so I love, first of all, I remember when I first started teaching at UCLA, I had 30 people in a classroom. I was offered to go to law school. I said, law students don't need me. Film students do. So they all sat in the back of the class. So I went up and sat with them. When they started looking at their computers or their phones, I would say, okay, it's sharing time. Let's see what's on your screen right now and make sure everybody in this room knows about it.
Peter, why didn't you become an actor? I think you would have been a terrific actor.
Well, when I was in film school, they did not, an MFA program, which I didn't finish, they would not accept acting as a bona fide course in a film school. And I took an acting course under Ralph Frued. If you know, there's a Ralph Frued theater at UCLA. He was my professor. My TA was Delia Salvi, both amazing teachers. And I took that acting course and I did every single scene, everything that I ever did in dialect. Because I'm a mimic. If I hear someone doing an accent, great lad, I don't know what you mean here, but we're telling you, I know we're having a great time. You should be buying this. And I love doing accents. So I did dialect. I threw myself into the characters and I had the best time. But I also knew that to be an actor it's a very intimidating process where you're rejected all the time and you spend a lot of time and you're not making money. And unfortunately, not being a person of any particular skill set or wealth other than what I have in my mind, I knew it was something that I probably wouldn't make, and I make a terrible waiter. Although I probably would have assumed the persona of Darth Vader, but maybe not.
Okay, Peter, we're going to do improv right now. We're at a restaurant and waiter.
Yeah. What do you want?
There's no silverware on the table. I was wondering if I could get some silverware.
Why? You don't have any food.
Good point. Would you like to take my order?
Tell me what you want to eat.
Tell me your specials.
We don't have specials. We ran out.
But the sign out front says specials 24 hours a day.
I know. Well, this is in the 25th hour. I'm sorry.
End scene. Thank you for that. I love doing improv with you. Now, your clients have been power players of Hollywood. including George Lucas, Keenen Ivory Wayans, John Travolta, Ron Howard, Andy Davis. Can you talk about your client, Robert Towne?
Robert would do this. I'm Robert. I'd like to talk to you about something. And I will talk to you a little bit below your hearing volume and make you lean into me. As I talk slowly, I do this. You will pay more attention to the words I say. I'll tell you a funny story. Robert loved my writing. He's one of the few people who's read my screenplay work. And we would go on the weekend, he would go writing, and I say, so how many pages did you write this weekend, Robert? And he said, I wrote 3 pages. So what did you do? Write a sentence, say, I got to go to Starbucks, come back and say, oops, I forgot to pick up a hot dog. And how many pages did you write, Peter? I said 30. And I said, so how do you explain that? You're going to love his answer. I rewrite a lot.
Writing is
rewriting. One
rewriting.
of the great things about Robert is he had theories of how to write a script and how to use people. And I have theories about how to write a script and use people to look at it. But ultimately, what I say to writers who are lucky enough to be paid to do writing, at some point in the time-space continuum, you're asked to do a rewrite and you're given notes. Good producers are very specific in their notes. I always ask people who give notes for my clients, for me, or for whatever, tell me what change you want, but more importantly, tell me why you want the change. And it can't be the second act isn't funny enough. That doesn't give me any guidance. So what happens with that is they give a sample of how they would like it done, and maybe it's a good idea. But if you know why they want it done, maybe you'll come up with an even better idea. The other thing to do is when you're rewriting a script for a third party and they give you page by page notes, here's a hint. Rewrite the script by interpolating their notes only. Do not rewrite the script. Do a private draft for yourself where you interpolate the scenes they want and the changes they desire into your script. Do not rewrite it. And then let it sit for a couple of days. The next step is to read your script and create consistencies. So if you had a setup here, make sure there's a payoff there. And then when you're finally done that, put it aside for a few days, look at it again, then start doing what I call fine sanding work. What that does, it stops you from pissing off your producer because your producer wants a particular kind of script. And if you start writing from ground zero, you're going to go off on tangents. And no matter what you say that you won't do it, you will do it. So don't do that.
Very good. Very, very good advice. Peter, what is the best advice you'd like to leave for the writers who are listening?
You need to be 2 people. One is a creative force that's going to carry this through. And you need to be brutally honest with yourself. And if you have people you really, really trust who are skilled at reviewing written work, you can use their input. And usually a lot of them are producers with track records. But ultimately, that's the one person. The other person is the marketing executive that you will hire from yourself to maximize putting the village together and getting it to the right people. And that means you're going to use your social media contacts, ask friends for content, whatever it is, you have to figure it out. Those 2 people will deal with the issues separately, and at some point they'll get together and talk.
Peter, thank you so much. When I heard that there was just a possibility of having you on the Writers Hangout, my heart started beating. And I don't think it has stopped till we got into the interview. And then I'm just having...
And then it stopped. I mean, then you almost died. And you need a cardiologist. And we go back to an earlier presentation. Okay. It's like the old joke, what would you rather have? The heart of a young athlete killed in an automobile accident or an 80-year-old lawyer? The answer is always going to be the 80-year-old lawyer because it's never been used.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining us on the Writers Hangout.
My pleasure. Writers, go out and write and get your marketing better half to work.
And that's a wrap for the Writers Hangout. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Your positive feedback will help us keep the show going so we can continue bringing you more future episodes. Remember, keep writing. The world needs your stories. The Writers Hangout is sponsored by the Page International Screenwriting Awards, with executive producer Kristin Overn, producers Sandy Adomaitis, and myself, Terry Sampson. And our music is composed by Ethan Stoller.